is a new animated film coming from Warner Animation Group, or WAG for short, which I know the irony of they're making a dog movie and their company name is WAG. It's hilarious. This movie is not only the startup of a new Hanna-Barbera cinematic universe of sorts, but it's also telling another story in the Scooby Doo and the Mystery Inc. world. It retells their origin when they're little kids, how they met up, and how they've grown, and how they're about to start a real business out of Mystery Inc. But at the same time, the villain played by Jason Isaacs, Dick Dastardly, has hatched a menacing scheme. He needs Scooby and Shaggy for some reason. He and his robot army are after them, so luckily the superhero group led by the Blue Falcon has come to rescue them and help them on their quest. Obviously, I watched Scooby Doo a lot growing up. It's a cartoon that I have enjoyed, obviously. And the movies written by James Gunn, Scooby Doo and Scooby Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed, they hold a special place in my heart as far as nostalgia goes. I've watched those movies many times as a kid. I haven't watched them recently to give like a proper opinion, like if it holds up or not. More than likely it probably doesn't, but you know, it still probably would hold a special place in my heart, especially Monsters Unleashed. That was a Kino Scooby Doo film. When I heard that they were going to make a CG animated Scooby Doo, I was like, okay, that probably could turn out really good. It's made by an animation company that I don't think has made a bad film yet. The one that I like the least out of them is Smallfoot, but even then, it's a decent movie. I have no problems with it as far as like, I hate it, I think it's mediocre. It's like, I think it's fun. They're responsible also for Storks, a movie that I think is really good, and the Lego movies, all of them that we've gotten so far, and I think they've done a really great job handling them. I think this company does a really great job of handling their projects, so I was really excited to see what they could do with Scooby-Doo, and then, you know, more news came out that it was going to have other Hanna-Barbera characters, and I was like, I hope all of these different characters can mesh well, especially since I thought this was going to be a more traditional Scooby-Doo film, but now it's like going to be something a little different. I hope it doesn't turn out to be kind of a disaster as far as like clashing story elements or something like that. I was just hoping for not a mess. And the director, forgetting his name, Tony Cervone, I hope that's how you pronounce it, I'm sorry. But he has a long experience with animation, so I didn't really have a problem there, but where a lot of skepticism did come, besides from the trailers, which I just thought were kind of alright, but the writers of this. Now, two of them haven't written anything before until Scoob. But the other two, one of them is Adam Zitkiel. I am so sorry, I keep mispronouncing names. He wrote Alvin and the Chipmunks, The Road Chip, and most recently Rampage. And Rampage is definitely a better movie than The Road Chip, but it's still not really a good film. But I was like, okay, maybe some cartoon goofiness can be put in because of that screenwriter, who knows. Then you have the other guy, Matt Lieberman, who wrote The Christmas Chronicles with Kurt Russell, the recent Addams Family film, which I heard pretty bad things about, and Playing with Fire, a movie that I really did not like. I liked it for all the wrong reasons, but it's not really a good movie. So that was worrisome before watching this thing. But of course, as you all know, it got canceled from its theatrical release because of COVID, so it came straight to homes on VOD on demand, and I watched it this morning, and this movie was actually a really pleasant surprise. I enjoyed this movie a lot more than I thought I was going to, and what really helps with that is that the combining of different Hanna-Barbera characters doesn't work against the movie. I think they were able to merge them all together in a way that was actually really fun, in a way that kind of did make sense. I do wish that maybe in the beginning, when they're retelling the young kid version of the Mystery Inc. gang, that maybe they could have involved the, hey, we're in a superhero world a bit more, because it seems like, you know, Shaggy's just like, I got an action figure, the Blue Falcon, and that's the only introduction we have for superheroes in the world. So later when the actual Blue Falcon shows up, it's kind of like, oh, okay, it's a little jarring if you didn't know that was going to happen, if you didn't know anything about this movie going in. But other than that, I think they did a great job of writing a story that works well to entertain kids, it works well in the animation realm, but it's also one that's supported with a lot of heart. It all kind of harkens back to a lot of the themes that are started with Shaggy and Scooby. The movie opens with a lot of heart between those two younger versions of those characters, and that kind of heart and the message that accompanies it: when we grow up, we're not going to forget each other, our friendship bonds us stronger together. It goes on throughout the rest of the movie. So you're watching a story that has a lot of fun, cartoony elements, and one that makes sense considering there are superheroes and Dick Dastardly in this world, but it's one that you can also get behind because the characters are treated really well, and they give them that necessary heart. This movie's not made cynically, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Like, they definitely took a lot of time crafting these characters, as well as the jokes too. This movie has a really good sense of humor. Not every one of them lands. There's a recurring Simon Cowell gag that's kind of like, okay, can we stop that? And a couple other jokes that just kind of dud. But overall, this movie is really funny, and it got me laughing quite a few times. Shaggy and Scooby's relationship obviously works really well. That was another thing I was worried about going into, is that Matthew Lillard was not going to be playing Shaggy, and he's the one who's kind of the most famous for playing Shaggy, and they got Will Forte, who's not a bad pick, but I was wondering how he was going to work, especially against Frank Welker, who is famously kind of Scooby Doo at this point. And he did a really great job for this version of Shaggy. Will Forte really did capture a lot of what makes Shaggy great. He and Frank Welker really bounce off each other really well. And of course, I feel like I've said this multiple times before, but that's one of the joys of animation, is that when you have people doing lines by themselves, but it sounds like their chemistry's so good that it sounds like they had to have been bouncing off of each other in a recording booth. And that's really present here with every single character. For example, you have Ken Jeong playing Dynamite and Kiersey Clemons playing Dee Dee Skies, and they bounce off each other really well, with Mark Wahlberg, who is playing the Blue Falcon, or a new version of the Blue Falcon in the context of this movie. He's the one who is all about his appearance and making bold entrances. He's all about being a superhero, but he has no experience with it whatsoever. And these two other characters are like, they're the gung-ho, they know exactly what they're doing, but they have to work with this Blue Falcon who is inexperienced and is troubling their overall mission. I'm unfamiliar with that character. I didn't watch the Dynamite cartoon. I definitely watched Scooby Doo, but I did not watch Dynamite. So if this is accurate to that cartoon, or if this is like a new spin on that story, I would have no idea. But for what they do with it in this movie, I thought it worked really well, because Ken Jeong plays Dynamite really well, Kiersey Clemons is good, and Mark Wahlberg is almost like perfectly cast as the Blue Falcon. He kind of has that perfect voice for this character. He sounds really bold and really heroic, but then he's able to slip into those more cowardly moments really well with his voice. He's really perfect as this character. And what I really like about him too is that if you want to look a little deeper, they don't make a big highlight on it, but some of these characters kind of line up as far as that they're not so different overall. You know, you have Scooby and Shaggy, you know, sharing some elements that the Blue Falcon would have, and then all of them kind of sharing some elements that Dick Dastardly would have, who, by the way, Jason Isaacs is playing just so wonderfully. Like, you can tell he's having a blast in the recording booth. You can tell he's just really eating up this role and just delivering his dialogue with such fun, you know, such dastardly fun, and that's really great. I did watch Wacky Races when I was growing up on Boomerang. I didn't watch Dynamite, but I watched Scooby Doo and Wacky Races, and seeing Dick Dastardly again was actually really great, you know, because they captured him really well. It reminded me of when I watched him on Wacky Races and being like, that's a really funny character and I like him. Considering how this year is going so far, he might be top 5 villains of the year. I'm not saying that for certain, but he's just that entertaining. There's a moment where he's like explaining his drive for like his evil plan, and the way he's telling it, it's supposed to be kind of tragic, but the visual, like the flashback you're seeing, is contradicting the way he's telling it. It was like, that's really funny. Like, that's a nice touch, you know, like going back to this movie's sense of humor, they really have a good grasp on how to make people laugh in this film. And a lot of jokes really hit, especially that one, and especially that character overall. Even his robot army, like they'll change, like when they're evil, they look evil, but then when they're just in their downtime, they always have a smile. And when they're scared of Dick Dastardly because he's yelling at them, they're still smiling, but you can tell they're like shaking. It's really well thought out jokes. So this movie is really fun. It's got a good message for kids watching. It's not like a tearjerker one, but it's one that young kids might actually shed a couple tears at, because this movie does have a beating heart, as I said before. You do follow characters that you like, and you do understand their character arcs. For a movie that story is a little goofy, they handle that goofiness really well, and it works well for the animation world. And the CGI animation obviously looks fantastic. Like, everything looks so like visually gorgeous to look at. It's kind of a cliche to say with a lot of animated films, because just it's kind of expected that every animated film that comes out will look good, but it's just always nice to say, like, yeah, it looks good here, because sometimes you get movies like Arctic Dogs that don't look very good, but they somehow got made. It's got fun jokes, it's got fun action chase sequences that happen, it's got really funny characters with a lot of heart to them. If I had to have one other issue with this movie, I guess it's just the way Shaggy and Scooby meet up is really good. Like, they do a good job handling that, but it's just when they meet up with the rest of the gang, you know, Fred, Daphne, and Velma, that just felt a little, okay, we got to keep the movie going. We can't have them meet up in a way that feels natural or that they form an actual connection. It's just, it's Halloween night and Shaggy and Scooby get bullied in a really funny way, actually. Like, when the police came up, I was like, oh, here we go. But then they said something I wasn't expecting. I was like, okay, that's kind of smart. But then, of course, it just follows up with them walking up like, hey, you guys okay? And oh my gosh, we're in front of a haunted house. Let's go solve the case. And then they do, and they're like, hey, we should do this forever. And then they just jump ahead. And it's like, I wish there was just a little bit more of a connection there. If you're going to tell their origin story with them as kids and how they met up, I guess I just prefer if you just spent a little bit more time in making that feel a little bit more natural. Honestly, it feels like maybe they just thought it'd be really cute if we had kid versions of them, and then we can flash ahead, but it would be cute for like marketing purposes. And it's an idea that could work, but it just feels like they were just very desperate to jump ahead. And once they had Shaggy and Scooby meet, it just felt like, okay, now we gotta get the rest of the guys in. They solve a mystery and now they're good for life. It's like, I wish it was just a little, it felt a little more natural. It feels like one of those things where this movie could have opened with like the way the first Scooby Doo, written by James Gunn, opened, where it's just them on a case. For the people that have seen Scooby Doo, you get the gist and you just get to see them on a mission. But for people who aren't familiar with it, they get like quick character traits like, okay, this is that character, this is that character. I'm getting adjusted to who they are, and then we can get started with the real plot. It feels like maybe this movie could have opened with something like that, and it could have worked a little bit better. But overall, I did have a solid time with this movie. It's not one that's too deep, but it is one that'll get kids laughing and maybe crying near the end, because it is one that could get really emotional for them. But even adults, there might be a lot of jokes that stick out to them, like, hey, that's funny. They might be entertained by a lot of the characters, because all of the actors are doing a great job. Like Zac Efron playing Fred, Amanda Seyfried as Daphne, and Gina Rodriguez as Velma. They also do a really good job playing those characters, especially Zac Efron, who we all know is a goofball, and I'm glad they're giving him a lot of comedic jokes in this one to work off of, too. He's a really funny guy. So I'm glad that Fred was a little bit more comedic in this one. It definitely has its issues. It's not a perfect film, but it's definitely way better than like Trolls World Tour or The Willoughbys that you could be showing kids. I would definitely say this is probably better than those as far as like kid entertainment goes, because it's one that adults could also sit down and go, hey, that's not miserable, because it's actually a lot of fun and it's really well done for an animated film. I'm gonna give Scoob a B+. Not every joke works, and I do think it has a couple story structure problems near the beginning, but once it gets started, it's hard not to get really invested with the overall story. I know this is more of a superhero film compared to a mystery, haunting kind of story like the Scooby Doo show used to be, but you know, I think they made it work. We've seen so many takes on Scooby Doo, you know, and I think they did a really great job of having these other Hanna-Barbera characters interact with it to kind of just get you started for potentially a new like series of films based off of these characters. I don't know much about what they're planning on doing with this cinematic universe idea, but you know, getting it started with this movie is not a bad sign at all. It was a lot of fun, and I could potentially see myself being excited for another addition to Scooby Doo in the future. But if you've seen Scoob, leave in the comments below what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.